if you're not aware of what your office referral form is, please ask your administrator to see one, and then that begins the conversation about what should be classroom handled versus office handled. And again, what we find is many of us remain confused about that, and it's not because you're not a competent person, it's maybe because we haven't shared the information enough. So those should be objectively or operationally defined, as we can see there. Obviously, we don't want to use physical force or lock kids in closets. Sometimes if we get angry, that may seem like a good idea at the moment, but sorry, you just have to be up front. So it's nothing about, don't take it personally, okay? That's right, type of thing. So that's key, right? Here's a good question. Who can tell me what's the optimal duration of a timeout? Okay, so you're such a player, man. We like you. And he's up front, okay? So some people say it's 1 minute per age of the student, okay? So does that mean if you're a senior in high school, your exclusion from class should be no longer than 18 minutes? 1.5 times 8, now he's the math teacher, right, okay? Turns out in the research, durations of 15 minutes, you start to see sort of diminishing returns after that, right? It may make sense in high school, for example, if you do have to remove a student due to discipline, maybe that period's blown, right? Unless you have some way to excuse the kid. But a big message is a longer duration of timeout doesn't seem to be more effective. And that my anger at a student may think, yeah, let's go for a week, right? Because that's good, right? It's going to feel more effective, but it's really like problem gone is not necessarily problem solved in that way. The next piece to think about also is if you're going to use timeout or an office referral, then teach your students what that means, okay? Teach them what the protocol is. If you want them to walk over to the corner or go to an adjacent classroom or go to the office, then go ahead and do a presentation and let them know what's going to happen. If you do these things, I'm going to try these preventive things first, but if it really doesn't work out, I'm going to ask you to follow this protocol along with me. And then other decisions to make too. What if the student refuses to go? I'm sure you've encountered that, right? Okay? You need to know ahead of time what you're going to do, right? And also, if the student, you need a release criteria, right? Students may be very upset when they're isolated from the classroom. They may think that you have treated them unfairly, and you're going to see a lot of emotional behavior. And Gina will also tell us about this more today from a developmental perspective. But we need to know what's the protocol there, how do we respond under those situations. It shouldn't be a surprise, okay? So again, you might practice going to timeout by teaching it, right? And also if you're going to use it, we don't have any evidence that layering on emotion makes it more effective, right? So simply say, it's time to go, or whatever language you're going to use in that regard, and play the game. Don't cajole or repeat instructions if a student's sort of griping at you on their way out the door. Just let them go, right? That's called, we call that collateral behavior in that regard. So don't escalate the situation by giving more verbal stuff. Usually by that point, a kid's feeling pretty angry. They're not listening to what you're saying anyway in that regard. And then if you're going to use it, again, the advocacy is to use it as little as possible. But if you're going to use it, then do it. Does that make sense? Don't wait until the kid stepped on your last nerve, because then you're going to respond probably with more anger. I would, right? That type of thing. Use it a little early if you've got to take that time out. And again, Rita and Gina will give us that good language about how to prevent having to use it. But if you're going to use it, then use it in a systematic and careful kind of way. One of the pieces, and I'll leave this for Rita, these are in your handout, is what do we say to a student when they return, right? And we're going to call that a restorative conversation. And again, Rita will have us practice that more. But those are in there too, type of thing. And then the final piece is basically data. And I'm right at my time limit here. What I want to give is on page 9. And I'm sorry, it begins on page 8. is a checklist that I built for you, which basically is a task analysis of how to use that timeout or that office referral. So again, the advocated practices, we hope we don't have to use it, but odds are it will happen at some times during the year when you can't work it out, and the advocacy is to work within your schools, and we'll be supporting you to use as clear and consistent a protocol as possible if you're going to use that procedure. Okay? Sherry, Alana, is it break time? The agenda says break time. Yep, okay. So instructions are see you at 3:15. Right? Okay, thanks.
older kids didn't work, you know?
Right.
Even that insight, that but if a kid if a kid goes to that, there's the nephew, I'm going to class, I don't do shit. Well, you're going to get a good promotion. You could say, I finished everything. But you know, that's the place to start. So what I do is
All right, come on back, we're going to get started. Thank you. All right, if you would, let us welcome back Dr. Gina Rodriguez. She is going to be presenting the trauma-informed care aspect of today's integrated intervention. Let's welcome her with a warm applause.
Thank you. I know it's hot, everybody, so I'm going to try to keep you, give you a lot of information, a lot of good information to kind of compensate for some of the heat. I want to start with kind of an overview of where adolescents are during this time, kind of what are their capacities, what's happening in development, and then I want to talk about a strength-based approach to looking at some of the things that are happening for them and how we can take advantage of them, and then we'll get into some concrete skills. Okay, so this chart is just stages of development for adolescents. We break it into 3 stages. There's early adolescence, which is about 11 to 13, usually the onset of puberty. It can be as early as 9 though. We have middle adolescence, which is 14 to 15 in this chart, but I actually think it's about 14 to 16, given range of maturity. And then late adolescence, which is 19 to 25. So we know that the brain continues to develop until about the end of the 24th year. So adolescence, which means it's a time when there's developmental change, there's growth in brain, there's changes in hormones. That actually continues through about age 24 or 25. So I'm going to talk about those now. We have biological, psychological, and social changes that are happening for young people. Does anybody remember their adolescence? Does anybody remember how challenging adolescence is? Adolescence can be confusing, it can be difficult, it can also be great things can happen during adolescence. It's really a time of change. You're going from being a child, mostly under the direction and care of your parents, to being out in the world where you're primarily affected by other people. So you're affected by peers, you're affected by partnering relationships, you're affected by other adults around you, and so this sort of affects your development. So let's talk first about the concrete things that are happening in early childhood. In physical development, we have puberty beginning. So we have not only changes in hormonal balances for males and females, we have increases in hormones for both males and females. And this is what starts puberty for young people. And one of the things that you'll see first is sort of the physical manifestations of that their bodies start to change. But one of the challenges for young people is that their bodies don't change at the same rate, so they might look different than their peers. And actually the 2 groups that we worry about the most, or that seem to report the most problems, are those that underdevelop or overdevelop. People that are sort of in the middle of the bell curve do okay physically, but people on either end of those spectrums are at risk for negative interactions with their peers because of that. So we just need to watch for that. Then we have cognitive development. So you're moving from, fantasy and some early concrete operational kind of thinking to formal operational thinking, to be able to think abstractly, to be able to think about other people, to be able to think about big concepts, things like morals and values and judgment. Those things are starting to come into play in early adolescence. But remember, prior to that, young people are mostly just integrating what people tell them and repeating it. They can think about things, but they don't have a lot of capacity yet to sort of think about what they think about. There's a part of your brain, right in the middle of your brain where the two hemispheres come together, that has there's a piece of it that actually is the key to what makes us different than other mammals. And it is a part of our brain that allows us the capacity to think about what other people think about. So if I see someone on the street and I see their face, I can actually think about what they might be thinking about. That they might look angry, or they might be thinking that they want me to get out of the way, or they might be in a good mood and happy. The ability to imagine and create that story of what I think is in someone's mind is what makes us human, and it's beginning to develop right now in this stage of adolescence. So it's actually really exciting. It allows us to do a lot of things in academia. It allows us to do a lot of things socially for them. It allows them to expand their emotional capacity, but it's also coming very quickly and without a lot of context. So kids who don't get a lot of support around these new changes, sometimes it can be overwhelming for them. So the third piece is the emotional aspect. So kids are struggling at this age with the pull between being a child and moving into adulthood, particularly if they begin to look and act and be treated as adults. So the problem when you're working with adults is because they start looking like adults and they start doing things that are adult-like, we start treating them like they're adults, but they're actually still children. Their brains are still developing, which means their capacities, their reasoning, their understanding, their impulse control is all still in development. They just look about our size and like they're doing things that are adults. So it's really a time to move in rather than move out, even though their job during adolescence is to push adults away and try to figure out how to be adults. So that's the main developmental milestone that they're trying to achieve, is to figure out who they are and then move away into adulthood. So emotionally, that means that they're out in the world a little bit more on their own. So they're more affected by other people, which means that they're also affected by what other people think of them. So here's where we have peer interaction. That if peer interaction is good and supportive and positive, then that's going to reflect positively on the young person, and the young person's going to integrate those good things into who they believe they are. But if those interactions are negative, like if it's bullying, or if it's even more intense, like violent, or if there's negative peer interactions, then those things are also going to get integrated for the young person. And as the young person is trying to figure out who they are, they're going to start believing the things that are told to them, and they're going to start acting those out. So it's a really critical time, actually, in adolescence, when kids are developing an identity of who they are in many ways. We move into middle and later adulthood. They're practicing more and more of these skills, and they're getting more and more responsibility, freedom, space from adults. They're starting to practice those. The big thing that you want to do in adolescence, if we were in the perfect situation, would be that we would have lots of opportunities to try things and mess them up, because the recovery of messing up is how adolescents actually learn. Remember, all brain development is experience, so there's no way for them to grow that part of their brain, the part of the brains that teach them different skills that they're going to need to do to be adults, unless they practice them. But they also need to practice, fail, and recover. So here's the challenge. In a really healthy family, young people are allowed to try things out, make a mistake, maybe get a consequence or a boundary, but then try it again. In really unhealthy families, they either have no guidance and they're sort of stumbling through doing everything on their own, or they're allowed to do things, they mess up, and the consequences are disproportionate to the crime. So that teaches another really bad lesson, which is that they just need to figure out how to not let anyone know what they do, because the consequence is disproportionate. So when that happens in a family, we can help the family do better and sort of understand the milestones that a young person needs to meet and how to support them when they meet those. But if it's in a system, like a dependency system or a juvenile justice system, those systems are only going to respond punitively, and they don't allow kids to actually develop, age-appropriate development, so those kids get stunted. So a lot of kids that have been involved in systems for a long time, either in child welfare or in juvenile justice, haven't had the right force in order to sort of have these mistakes, learn from them, recover, and have normal development, so they get stunted in different places. Anybody work with an adolescent who seems younger to you? Okay. So, or anyone with adults who seems younger to you? Okay. So we used to say something called arrested development, which meant that we kind of thought that if trauma or something important happened at a stage of development, people would actually get stuck in that stage of development. It's kind of true, but this is actually what really happens. When things happen to us in our development, particularly when you're in adolescence because you have more context and understanding, what you do is you make sense of what has happened as well as you can, and then that's how you walk around in the world. So you take that experience and you say, oh, there's the lesson. I can't trust adults because adults lie to you. So then they walk around in the world not trusting adults and figuring out how to go around adults. So it's not that their development has been arrested, it's that their development was interrupted and they learned an important message at that stage of development, and now it will take a lot to undo that learning, but you can undo it. But it's actually really adaptive, it's survival. It means that something happened to them, they learned what to do, how to handle it, and now they're going to move forward that way. But the kinds of things they learn in crisis are actually not good things for engaging with other youth. Listening to authority, following work in school, progressing academically. They don't match up with the kind of skills that they have to develop while they're learning to survive and take care of themselves. So because those two don't go together very well, and these are stronger for them, then they do things in the classroom that are disruptive, that don't allow them to stay in the classroom, don't allow them to get along with others, and don't allow them to respect working with teachers and following the school day. So we have a lot of things we can do to kind of undo those lessons they learn. The good news is that it can be undone, that the brain has a lot of plasticity. So every time two neurons connect, which is a lesson, we see something, we do something, we experience something, and two neurons connect and sort of solidify that memory. That takes about, so that the good thing is that can be undone. The bad thing is that it takes about 500 times of doing something different for that connection to go away. So that's why these behaviors persist. So things like lying or defying authority or not listening, you know, when those are modeled over and over and over thousands of times in the home, then those kids can do those things easier. But when they're not modeled over and over in the home, then the kids figure out how to work around that, and then you've got those wires really, really dug in there, and that's the way they're walking around in the world. Add on top of that this is the normal time when they're supposed to be separating from adults, so they're supposed to be figuring out how to do as much as they can without getting punishment or negative feedback from adults. Some of that includes lying and hiding, the two things that people usually worry about the most with adolescents. Some of it is adaptive. They should do that because we don't all walk around, not lying, but saying every single thing that we mean at every moment honestly to everyone, right? We have to hold some things, right? So we had to learn how to do that. We had to learn what was appropriate to hold, what we should say out loud. You have to have a filter, think about what you're going to say, how it's going to affect people. Young people don't have that filter, so they either say nothing or they say whatever they think. That's all in development right now. That's all just beginning to happen. So that's part of their kind of social, emotional development. Now, as they get older, these things will get better and tighter for them. They'll get more adaptive if they have more positive adaptive experiences, and they'll get less adaptive if they have more negative and maladaptive experiences. So remember, they're developing, but they can only develop out of their experience, and a lot of times their experiences are guided by other people. They don't have the opportunity to make their own experiences. Adolescence is kind of it's a challenging time for them because they feel like they're supposed to be moving towards adulthood, but they have less freedom to decide what happens to them. Does anyone remember being an adolescent and thinking that you could do it better if you just had your own apartment and your own car? It's a really common experience for adolescents that they think if I just didn't have to be in this house, if I just didn't have to follow these rules, I would be okay. That's part of normal development, that you're starting to think ahead, that you think you know how to do things. You think you can take care of yourself. It's really normal and adaptive, but kids that either get pushed into that because no one's taking care of them, or kids that don't get any guidance in that area don't do very well. So they sort of stumble through taking care of themselves. They stumble through becoming an adult. Okay? Let's talk about some positive strength-based stuff for adolescents, because this is what gets missed a lot. Adolescents are tough. You know, they're super emotional. They're working mostly from the middle of their brain. In brain development goes from the back to the front. The back part of your brain is the stuff that you're born with. It allows you to breathe, your organs to function, your body to work. That's the stuff that you're born with. And then the brain begins developing forward and then from the inside out. So during adolescence, they're at about mid-brain development, and that's your emotional center. So on top of the hormones and puberty that we talked about, they're also in this emotional center of their brain, which is a very reactive place. This is your fight, flight, or freeze. This is your life or death, your survival area. So adolescents are often right on the edge and in survival mode at all times. And if you add a layer of trauma to that, which includes abuse during childhood or abuse during adolescence, then that system can be dysregulated or even damaged, and they're even more volatile. So that's why adolescents tend to overreact to things, have really big emotions. But big emotions also have a positive side. So this is Dan Siegel's work. And Dan Siegel, he's a doctor who writes a lot about brain development. He focuses a lot on adolescents and children. And he talks about these 4 vital features of adolescence. And the first one is emotional spark. It's that idea that we know that during adolescence, young people are more emotional. Part of it is because where they are in brain development. Part of it is because of puberty. Part of it is because of increased peer relationships. But that we can take advantage of that emotional spark and see it as a positive. That they have a lot of capacity to connect with people. They have a lot of capacity to care for people. You know, their groups are very tight. If you ask most young people at this age, they have a best friend. Later, when you get older, your peer group will narrow and narrow, but in this age group, it's usually larger. So they're able to connect with people really well. They're able to care about people really well. They're able to have values like fairness and justice and loyalty. And those things are things that connect them with other young people. So those relationships can be really, really important. So it gives us an opportunity that if their peer relationships are positive, that's great. They can really develop and support each other. If those peer relationships are negative, then that can actually change their course because they're very susceptible to the values and the ideas of their peers. Now, if the peer relationship isn't very good, we have another opportunity with relationships with adults. And if the adults in their life naturally are good, then that's fantastic. That means that they're getting a lot of reinforcement, they're getting a lot of positive energy, they're getting a lot of positive feedback, and they're developing. But if it isn't positive in their natural environment, meaning they don't have caregivers or parents who are supportive, or they don't have family members or outside resources, we actually have an opportunity to bring adults in who can replace some of that for them. So adolescents need to have support and understanding, and they need to have, the number one thing is that they need to have somebody that leans into them even as they're pushing you away. So if you were in a very healthy family and your adolescent was pushing you away, you'd give them a little bit of freedom, but you'd hold them close to you because you would know they weren't ready to leave. In dysfunctional families, the family pushes the child away first, even before the child wants to, or as the child pushes away, then they push them completely out the door. So those kids don't get the pulling back and the holding on while they continue to develop, and they absolutely need that during that time. The next stage for them is going to be around romantic relationships. Because of this increased capacity for emotional spark, they're also looking to connect with someone, be heard, be understood. I don't know if you have heard this from adolescents. They don't think anyone understands them. Did anybody think that they were completely understood when they were an adolescent? It's not a very common experience. Usually you think that you're the only person going through it, and that certainly your parents don't understand what's going on, but maybe your peers do. So this is where there's romantic bonding and peer bonding because you think someone understands you. So remember, if that's a healthy environment and you're connecting with healthy peers or healthy romantic partners who understand you, that's great. You can be supportive of each other. But if they are negative peers or negative partners, then you actually reinforce that dysfunction and it makes it worse. So you notice that the kids that have problems tend to hang out with other kids that have problems. That's because they're trying to normalize their own experience by hanging out with that group. The only thing is then you have a bunch of kids with problems all in one group. So they can self-select that way, and then sometimes we put them in situations that way. So we put them in the class with all the kids that have the problem. Or we send them away to the school with all the kids that have the problems. Or we put them in the group home with all the kids that just came out of juvenile hall. So we also selectively group those kids together, and then we don't give them the alternate experience of having peers that are outside of that group. So we need to take advantage of this opportunity with this emotional spark. They have this capacity to connect, they have this need to bond and be close to people, and they have great capacity to be affected by other people. So the more positive those people around them are, the better the young person will be. Then we have social engagement. So they are biologically driven at this time in their life to engage with other peers. Remember, most of their social life has been in the family up until about 7, 8, 9. So they're emerging into a new world where they can actually create their social groups. You get born into whatever family you're born into, whatever siblings you get, whatever cousins you get, whatever parents you get. You can't make a lot of decisions around that. But as you emerge into the world in early adolescence, you can actually start picking people who are close to you. That's why at about 9 years of age, people start having a best friend. They're starting to actually select their family and their peer group around them. So, this is your second attempt to sort of pick people that are good for you that would support you. You didn't get that in your family, but you get it here. The problem is, if you're surrounded by a lot of good people, that's great. You get a lot of great friends. Friends who are also good in school, friends who are also positive and doing positive things, friends whose parents are supportive. But if you're in a negative environment, then you surround yourself with other peers who are lacking that kind of support, lacking those resources, lacking that guidance, and then you're creating this little subgroup of people who are trying to figure it out on their own. And that's where a lot of challenges come in. So we need to take advantage of the opportunity that they want to engage, that they want to connect, and if they're not connecting, then we need to figure out why. So we know a little bit from sort of the mass, tragic school shootings that kids that don't engage at all have some serious mental health issues that don't get addressed, and later they can be violent. Fortunately, a very, very small percentage of kids, even with severe mental health issues, ever are violent. But kids that don't engage, that's a huge red flag. Because remember, biologically, they are motivated to engage with other people at this time. So if they're not, that's a big flag. The other thing that could be happening is that they could be bullied. And if they're bullied, then kids do things to protect themselves. And remember, we've talked about this in a couple trainings before, but the kids that down here got victimized at home by their caregivers and their family members are actually at great risk and vulnerable to be bullied at school because they already have a lot of internal messages about self-worth and safety and taking care of themselves. So they actually get in situations a lot where they get bullied later. So we might think that it's just a normal rite of passage for kids to get harassed or bullied or for kids to be mean to them. And I've even heard some people say, well, it's good for them and it builds their character and it teaches them. It's actually not good for them, right? We wouldn't bully toddlers, right? No one would think that bullying toddlers was a good idea. So adolescents are